Yeah.
My name's Chandler Wood. I'm the editor-in-chief of PlayStation Lifestyle, and I'm thrilled to be here today with the team at Polyarc. This is the studio that made people care about a virtual mouse. And I'm going to talk to them today about their work in VR on Moss and the upcoming Moss Book 2. Before we get into that, I want to go over, the name of this is the Alchemy of Polyarc. And alchemy is defined as a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination. And sometimes game development can feel that way. It's magical, right? But that really disregards the hard work and talent that goes into making games and how all these pieces fit together. So we're here today to kind of demystify that magic and to connect the developers here with the fans and with other people and show them that they're just real people making games. And so I've got with me here 5 wonderful people from Polyarc, each representing a different discipline. And I couldn't be happier to have them all in one virtual room at once. With everything going on, it's nice that we can all still get together like this. So can you each introduce yourselves, your name and your title, kind of what you do at Polyarc? I guess we'll start with Josh. Go ahead.
Sure. Hey, my name is Joshua Stixma. I am a principal software engineer and design director at Polyarc, and I am representing design today.
I'll jump in there. I'm Kristen Quinn. I'm the audio director on the project, and I'll be talking about all things related to sound on the project.
All right, I'll go next. I'm Richard Lico, animation director at Polyarc, and I'll be talking about bringing Quill to life.
And I am Shauna Sperry. I'm a writer at Polyarc and talking about all things writing Moss.
And I am Mike Jensen. I'm the art director on Moss 2.
Awesome. So I first wanted to start with kind of a question for everybody. Is there any kind of central mantra at Polyarc? Is there something that everyone is working towards that keeps everyone on track and focused on achieving a singular goal? And is it something that's always been there from the beginning, clearly defined, or is it just kind of this ethereal thing that you all kind of work towards? Like, how has that been to come together on this central goal? Yeah, Josh, if you want to jump in there, start out.
I think it's a great question. I think you'd be hard pressed to try and pick one central thing. We talk a little bit about a lot of stuff for. Sorry, 1 second. I think I'm going to jump to Rick for this. Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, geez. Well, I'm probably not going to do as good of a job at this as Josh, but yeah, we try and be we try and look at the medium that we're after, and we try and use the discovery process to figure out good solutions and something that's fun and enjoyable. Like what makes VR appealing, what makes our games appealing, what's important to us, and we try and keep an open mind and figure stuff out as we go. Josh, you're back.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. I had a crying 4-year-old that needed some attention.
See, real people.
Real people. Yeah, when we started, we were really trying to think about, we've got this new medium, this new platform, virtual reality. What are things that are really important? What are the unique things that you can only do in that medium? And what are things that are important to us when we try to translate that to the type of game that we do want to make? And that varies from one of our really important things. If I were to say a mantra that we at least say a lot is it comfortable? That ends up being a pretty significant pillar for the studio. When you look at a lot of the early VR games, there's a lot of ones that were sort of in that prototype kind of space where it was like, hey, we're just going to see what we can do. And then as developers, we're discovering what is actually comfortable for players, what's going to allow them to be immersed in the space without getting queasy or being constantly reminded they're in a game. And that's really why comfort ends up being so important to us. It's one of the key pillars for us as a studio, and it's one of the reasons why we don't actually move your camera in a game like Moss. In many cases, we talk about comfort. We talk about hey, are we playing it in VR enough to ensure that we're getting that key player experience is a big thing for us as a studio as well. And that's something that every single discipline ties into in terms of what is the player meant to experience? Who is this for? How can we strengthen this relationship with Quill and this bond? Is the character being sold? I'm sort of stepping over some of the things that Rick might say on the animation side, but there's a lot of things we ask ourselves. A lot of it ends up being, at least I'll try to limit it to the design side, is what is the player experience and how can we make that better? And are we taking the player out of the game? Because we really want to draw on some of the key tenets of virtual reality, which is that immersion, that strong immersion in the space, but then also that physical interaction with the space and ensuring the player feels comfortable doing that. Sorry, I might have jumped on a few other people's answers.
Yeah, anybody else who has anything can feel free to jump in, on that mantra. How are you following this kind of singular mantra that you're going forward with what you're trying to achieve with Polyarc and with Moss?
I think the physical interaction piece that Josh just mentioned is huge. And then just also the another huge one for us is just the emotional connection opportunities to the characters in VR, I think is a huge asset of VR and something that we focus on and consider throughout.
And with you doing writing too, do you have to write in a different way to account for that emotional aspect and that emotional connection and having the player be a character within the story? Is that very different from how you'd write anything else?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think a lot of it is probably similar to non-VR storytelling, but when you're making a VR game, which is it's a huge asset for us in terms of those emotional connection opportunities, and that's in your mind from the beginning, and you're trying to strengthen it and kind of consider that as you go, and then Rick is doing so much awesome work with all of the animation and the character animation. But what's interesting from the writing perspective is that you're mostly, it's a first person character. Like you as the player, as the reader, are a character in this game that's present in this game, but you're kind of, you're looking at this stage almost of other characters. And so sometimes it's easy to just kind of forget that you're there. And so we're constantly, wanting to make sure that we're maximizing that emotional connection opportunity by making sure that we're including the player in moments and referencing the player in how we're writing the story. And so I think we've learned that that's that connection you have with Quill, that partnership, it's foundational to Moss. And so we want to constantly be thinking about that as we're writing it and just strengthening it as we go.
To add to what Sean is saying here, I think when you have a character that actually looks at you, that you can reach in, feel the heartbeat of, and you're building these little intimate moments with this character, that sets up a lot of emotional resonance in those little interactive moments. Then when something happens to the character in the story written by Sean and the great team there, it adds that much more weight. Because now it's personal, because now you built that relationship, so you're more invested in the events that happen.
And following up on that, Rick, you and I talked animation pretty extensively back when Moss first launched. You've got a lot of history in video games and animation. So what have you learned about animation in VR specifically? And is it very different from what any other game animator might be doing? I know you do a lot of work with other animators and helping to teach animation skills and stuff like that. How is that between VR and kind of standard game dev?
In some respects, it's not really all that different because, when Quill swings a sword, you need the reaction to land on the button input. You need that combat to feel good. You need the enemy to respond properly. All the things you have to worry about in any other game. And then with cinematics, it's very similar to film, where you need to stage the shot. You need to get, you figure out how much clarity you want. You need to get the proper beats in place and the timing of the scene and string it all together. But what separates it is that interactivity, that direct one-on-one connection with a character. So when we first started Moss, there was this great moment where back when we started the original game, we were thinking, okay, Quill's just going to run around, swing a sword. She's she's going to be a standard third person character. And then we had this moment where she actually turned and looked at you because we added a look screen and we put your head as a target. And it was shocking because she was actually looking at us now. Like all of a sudden the traditional medium, that fourth wall's been broken. And we're like, wow, that's the game. Actually looking at her, grabbing her, interacting with her, that's the heart of the game. So then we started adding little reactions, giving her opinions to what she's, experienced, having her react to gameplay decisions you've made, like you fall in the water and she comes out and she has to shake herself off because now she's wet because of a decision you've made. And she has an opinion about that. She doesn't like being wet. And all of a sudden now you're starting to do things that traditional games don't do, like having, a character that tracks your head as you move around the space, and, when they're hurt, their heart's elevated, you can feel that in the vibration of the controller. Those are things that you don't get in a normal game. And those are things that, like, I think if we push more and more on those, it's just taking advantage of the medium.
Let's jump over to Mike now. Does your art take into account VR from the outset? Do you have to think about your art in a different way because of knowing that players are going to be in those worlds rather than kind of viewing them through a window?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot of things that don't change, and I'll just point out a couple of things that do. Since Josh was talking about immersion, like one of the things that we found that helps with immersion and kind of reinforces it is like real world scale. And so like in a traditional game, when say you're making a door, for example, you kind of want to like oversize things and like play with scale and proportions a lot to just see what works best on the screen and with the game. Whereas when you kind of do that in VR, like, and you put on the headset, you quickly notice like, oh, that thing is way out of scale, or it's too big, or it's too small. Like you can tell right away. And so that's one of the things that we worked on to try and make it accurate, which is pretty easy to do because you just work on it and then you put on the headset and you can kind of tell, is this feel real or does it not? And we also earlier on in Moss 1 had like rulers that we would use if we needed like real world reference for scale. We would go and measure stuff and bring that into the game.
Quill was actually a ruler too, because she's like 1-to-1 scale for a real mouse, right?
Yep, exactly, 1-to-1. Yeah. And then I guess
used her as kind of a model for modeling everything else. She was kind of the centerpiece of that in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's like the world being the correct scale is kind of one of the reasons why we went with like small animals and rodents, is because they fit in the world and made a lot of sense for that scale. And so that's kind of one of the reasons for some of the theming of the world itself. And then just on Josh was talking about the fixed camera stuff too, and that's kind of convenient on our end because what it means is we know exactly where the player is going to be when they're playing through the rooms. Like you don't move in between rooms, you kind of functionally teleport. And so we know exactly what the player's view is going to be. And so we can really polish that view like perfectly. But then when you go to a different view, if you were to look back at it, it doesn't look so good because it's meant only from that particular view. So I think that's
Good, Mike.
Yeah, we tailor it to where you're going to be on purpose. So it makes it easier in a way.
Cool. Let's go to Kristen now. How do you approach audio in an experience like Moss where, I mean, sounds need to be more than just sound effects, right? There's to me, it seems like there needs to be something a little bit different there. It needs to be an immersive part of the world. Does audio design account for everything from sound effects to music and how all those work in concert? And how are you accounting for the player, again, being in that world rather than viewing it through a window?
Yeah. With Mike talking about scale, we look at things a lot in the same way to create that sense of immersion. And it's also about perspective, right? We think about like a lot of sounds are designed to be from Quill's perspective, and she's small and the world is very large. And so like from the outset of when I joined the project, I looked at what Steven had done on Moss 1 and kind of came up with like a style guide for what sound was. Like what made the sound of Moss the sound of Moss, and a lot of and that connection, like how do you create that emotional bond with Quill? And a lot of it was like, well, you're not outside the terrarium looking in. You're kind of in the terrarium, and you have a magnifying glass because you're such a small character. And so we look at over designing a lot of detail when it comes to the world, so that you really get immersed in feeling how small is Quill and feeling more connected to what she's experiencing in the world. And in terms of like, does sound touch music and VO? Yes. We're working with our amazingly talented composer that was on Moss One, Jason Graves. He's just like incredible, like super magical. Yeah, he's so good. And a lot of that was also evaluating like how does sound effects, VO, and music work together when it's all sitting together. A lot of that is looking at frequency content and trying to figure out like, oh, we're creating a really big character that's eating up a lot of low end in the sound effects, so maybe we want to create instrumentation that's sitting more in the higher frequency range, so they're not competing. And so we're always designing our content together and trying to look at like the picture holistically, and that includes VO. We have Morla coming back as our amazing storyteller and narrator, and part of that is creating that like reading a story feel and feeling that emotional connection and resonance when you used to be young and have stories read to you. Like we're always continuing to look at ways to not break that immersion.
Awesome. So I want to go back to Josh for this one. You guys receive a lot of questions at Polyarc about, bring this to the 2D space, bring it off of VR, bring, I want to play Moss just on my PlayStation or just on my PC or whatever. And you guys, I've talked to you about it before. I've asked you about it before. You guys don't really seem interested in doing that. And it really feels like maybe it wouldn't work as well doing that. Tell me a little bit about, feels like it's very tied in with design, obviously. Tell me why wouldn't that work and why that's not something that you're really pushing out there, that you want to keep Quill in VR.
Yeah, sure. And to clarify, I think it would work. I think just in terms of the experience that we're really aiming for as a studio, talked a little bit about us really wanting immersion. You can get a certain level of feeling like a character has some level of realness to it on a 2D screen, but things are just so much more impactful and so much more powerful when we create that perception that you are actually in that space and you are taking part in that moment together with that character and you're having a real true bond. We know that, Quill she's a computer character. She does things because we made the code to do that, but the perception to the player in the moment is so much stronger that she is real and she is creating moments with them together. And that's something that really is only possible with virtual reality, like as the medium, as the platform, and it just accentuates it so much more. And then also getting back to the physical interaction, Rick touched on this, you can reach in and pet her and be part of that experience, and you're reaching in and moving big things, and then she like looks up at you and gives you a thumbs up or a smile. All of these things, like the art, the audio, the animation, the narration, it all combines to make this experience that does feel real, that does feel seamless. And that the power of virtual reality is we can bring you into our world. As Polyarc, as a studio, we're creating this world for people. We want people to come into the world of Moss and go on an adventure with their tiny friend Quill and feel like that adventure was real. And while you could do that on a 2D platform, I just don't think it has the power of emotion, the power of connection that you would have otherwise.
Awesome. I want to move into more talking about Moss Book 2 now, and moving a little bit more into what you've learned going from what is effectively Book 1 now into Book 2, and kind of how the disciplines overlap. And I thought it was interesting, Rick, when you were talking about how the initial concept of Moss wasn't even necessarily on the connection. You were just kind of creating this third-person game. Oh, okay, it's this cute small little mouse. The scale is really interesting because scale is fun to play with in VR, either up or down. And suddenly you landed on that opportunity, and that's what you made Moss into. So what is that? What is the keying thing going into Moss Book 2? What is the thing that you've realized that you really want to do with Moss Book 2 to bring that into a whole new experience now? I guess we'll go Josh first, and then we can kind of go to the different disciplines and see how everybody overlaps and interacts. It's such an interesting project. And I think a lot of it is colored by us being a small studio. We tend to, as disciplines, interact almost daily on every single small thing that goes into the game. One thing that to me was unique from a virtual reality perspective was it was late in the development of Moss 1, and we had a moment where we were playing through the game, and we just weren't really getting the feedback that Quill was feeling real enough. And I was talking, like, Rick and I were really talking a lot about, like, hey, we want Quill to play reactions. We want her to respond to situations. We want her to feel a bit more real. And it ends up being like this amazing amount of collaboration between art and design, not making gameplay like animations like sword swings, which is the usual thing. Of course, we have that in there. But it's like, is she looking at me at the right time? Can we use a different look screen for this? She was giving me the thumbs up, but her hand wasn't pointing in the right direction. Can we try and tune that to make that better? These are the kind of the weird, like, I think things that are sort of novel and unique to like a virtual character that you're creating. We want to have that perception that she's real. And this all came in super, super late, by the way. Rick can attest to this. He actually, and this is, Rick is amazing. He actually was able to create a lot of these animations and performances that really sold the character. And it wasn't until I think a few weeks before we were like locking down the game that we're able to get them all plugged in.
Just banging through a bunch of stuff, and you were soldiering the hookup on all of it, and just going crazy. Yeah.
I apologize, Rick, because that was like, it's like, are you gonna get this in, Josh? I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Trust me, I promise. And we managed to get it in at the end, and that's part of the perception that she's real, was getting all of those in. But a thing that we would do when we played through is like, and once again, Rick calls this out, but everybody calls this out. Like, is Quill feeling like a robot right now, or is she not feeling real right now? And then we would take that and then try to iterate on that and make that better as best we can. But yeah, that's an interaction that I have with animation that feels a bit unique.
So going into book 2, let's go to you, Shauna, with narrative. And you're telling this story where realistically the only story that's being told is by the narrator. And then being told by the player interactions with the character, but Quill herself does not really speak. She's speaking through interaction. So do you have a lot of writing those kind of interactions, like with Rick, to kind of help bring her to life through what your intent is with what you want to bring to the story?
Yeah, absolutely. We have regular multiple times a week story meetings, and Rick is core to that, along with the writers, along with different other disciplines, depending on what we're working on. So we're all working very closely together. And then, a lot of the acting is Rick, and we're constantly trying to talk and make sure that we're aligned on, okay, what is Quill thinking here? What is Quill feeling? Like, what is the tone and vibe of this moment? And it's very important that we're aligned on all of that for everything. And the way the narrator works, like Quill is having lines as if it's read through the storybook. And so it kind of all just really goes together in terms of how the question's about how we're kind of all collaborating together, right?
How all the disciplines work together. Right?
Yeah, no, and it's it's truly everybody. With audio is also core to the acting in terms of specifically, a lot at the end of the project, we're doing a lot of table reads and working together on the voice direction and all of that. And even, like very recently, Kristen and I just kind of ad hoc jumped in a room with our other animator, Leanne, and Elise, a sound designer we're working with. And we were all kind of just collaborating and talking about this one room and cinematic moment of the game and making sure that we were all aligned on tone, mood, like where are the big audio moments happening that we want to make sure we're not stepping on with narration that we're writing for the narrator over it, and that everything's kind of complementing and gelling. And so we're constantly trying to align. And I think that we only want to continue to figure out how to do that more. And then if I'm just going to like ramble on here, we recently have an embedded designer in the story meetings right now, kind of being the narrative designer as we're trying to, smooth out everything. At one point, art was heavily involved just because we were so closely going back and forth on talking about the book pages and the storyboarding from that. And that's very collaborative, and there's a lot of back and forth. And then, engineering actually made us some awesome story tools this time around. So it's super easy for us to be working in the screenwriting software. And then I'm not the one doing it, but I hear that it's a pretty smooth process getting that uploaded into the game kind of quickly and easily now. And so it's kind of, we're working with everybody at different times, but all the time. And I think we only notice that just if we're having a problem with something, and once we're all talking and aligning, we're like, God, this is the way to do it. This is what works better, and kind of trying to find ways to do it more.
Mike, she mentioned art and bringing art in. I mean, your whole responsibility is bringing their vision to life, right? Visually. Yeah. How are you working with them to kind of take what's in their heads and what they're putting on paper as words and bring it to what people are actually seeing when they play the game?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, well, especially early on to start with, we did a lot of work figuring out what locations do we want to go to? We know Quill's journey from the first game, where do we want to take her this time? And there was a lot of back and forth between story and art, figuring out where does Quill want to go, or where do we want to take Quill? That kind of leads into a different thing that I'm not going to talk about now. But and then Shauna mentioned the book, which is just a huge part of the story. Working with story to figure out what do those pages look like when we have 8 pages to tell a story for a single chapter. What can we fit in, and what kind of views do we want to see, and how do we progress the story? Because that's one of the main areas we're actually progressing the story and telling the story is through the book. And so that kind of collaboration in there is really key to, we only have a small amount of space to tell the story. How do we tell it in a way that really resonates with the players? So.
And how does that work into things in the first game, there was the scene with the I believe it was the deer in the background, right? That was just this amazing scene where they kind of walk over, and it gives you that sense of scale again. And it's really not core to the story necessarily, but it really is setting up a lot of background. And can we expect more stuff like that going into book 2? And
oh, totally. Yeah, that was one of the most magical moments. And I think that's actually a really good thing to point out is collaboration, because I'm pretty sure, I can't remember exactly who had the idea, maybe Rick, but it was kind of just an idea that someone threw out there, and then Corinne was like, okay, I'll make the model, and Rick's like, okay, I'll do the animations, and all of a sudden it was in the game, and you experience it, and you're like, oh my gosh, we need so much more of this. This feels awesome. So I think those kinds of rapid iterations of a couple of different disciplines just coming together and having an idea and seeing it through to a prototype that you can experience is some of the best moments in the game, I think.
So I want to jump into talking a little bit about AI now, because that seems kind of core to this. AI is entering a space of becoming more and more convincing. and creating and emulating what feels like real emotional bonds with beings that are simply complex ones and zeros and animations and art and, you know, all these disciplines coming together to create this AI character. Personally, I would say I felt a real connection with Quill. I cared for her, but do you consider the player's bonds with Quill to be artificial and manufactured due to her virtual nature, or is that a genuine connection? How do you kind of connect that tissue there?
Well, I think everyone's different, right? So like some players just play the game and it's a speed run opportunity, right? And they don't connect with Quill. And other players are, you know, they really resonate with her. And I think it's personal. And, you know, when you look at AI and all the stuff that they're trying to do to create virtual companions, I think what they're trying to do is emulate the human experience. And I think that the trick to doing that is playing with unpredictability. So like one of the things I learned personally on Moss 1 was if Quill does exactly what you're expecting her to do, you're like, okay, validated, and you stop thinking about it, and you move on, and it doesn't stick with you. But much like any, you know, like your friends or your family, like they're always doing things to surprise you. They're never acting the way you expect them to. They're always saying something weird or something crazy, and you know, like, you know, well, I don't know, maybe my family's just crazy, but like it just it just feels like, you know, like people in your life are all very unpredictable, and that's what makes them interesting, and that's what makes you think about them, you know, when you're not around them. So I think the trick for Quill is not answering all the questions. It's asking more questions than you're answering. It's giving her a moment for you to lean in and be like, Quill, what, honey, what are you trying to tell me? What are you saying? And I think like things like communicating with ASL, she does that. And granted, like a small percentage of our players speak ASL, right? So like traditional industry wisdom is, well, if only a few percent, like a very tiny percentage will understand what she's saying, we shouldn't do it because we don't want to lose their attention. But I think the trick is we should do it because so little of the, you know, player base knows that, because they're going to lean in, they're going to try and figure out what she's saying, and they're going to be super engaged. And then the people that know ASL are going to go online and they're going to post, oh, this is what she's saying. And then the people who don't know it might be so curious that they're going to go online and Google it. And then they find out from someone who speaks it. Now these people are talking online, and it's building this like collaborative moment that was inspired by this tiny little mouse and the questions she's asking, not the answers she's giving. And if AI were to go down that route, if they were to embrace more of the unpredictability and the asking the question, I think that's what will eventually make AI really appealing.
I totally agree with that. And I think like what you hit on, the unpredictability, we talk about delight a lot with our game, which is kind of that unpredictable, like joy, is sort of a way of describing it. And we even actually had like a few performances with Quill in a puzzle where she didn't actually know what to do. And she would scratch her head and then point at something. And those were cases where like, oh, she's trying. That didn't help me, Quill. And you spur on, as soon as we can have people talking to Quill, I think that's where things start to get real, and you've blurred that line. And I'm, as somebody who's really excited for AI and all of that tech, I totally agree with Rick. I think it's something where we would never want to use AI to make a perfect character that does what we expect all the time. We would want a character that feels impulsive, feels real, and feels like it still has those flaws and those unknown things. She's a character of a video game, but she doesn't know what's going to happen. How do we make that character something that's realized in the game, right? So, but that said, so excited if that does become a future thing to take advantage of, because like as a studio, we're just so excited about characters. And that's one avenue for making characters feel more real. Of course, I will comb through the entire game and hand place hundreds of interactions and reactions to make her feel real. But there might be an alternate way of doing that can even create things that we didn't think of in terms of an interaction that could be really exciting for players.
I'd love the day to come when, you know, I'm just able to sit on the couch, watch a movie, look to the side of me on the couch, and there's Quill like,
yeah. Yeah, that's probably when the designers lose their jobs, though. Press the button. Game is done.
I mean, but would you say that arguably the connection with Quill is based on all of you, on what all of you have brought to the table, that no one of you could come into this and create what Quill is without the other, without narrative, without audio, without art, animation, design? All of it is really central to what players feel when they connect with Quill, and that, those first moments of her coming out from behind the leaves and seeing the player, and then going to all the way to the end of the game where, I don't know if we want to spoil things for Moss 1, but big things happen by the end of that journey. And obviously we're looking into book 2, even bigger things look like they're going to happen. It seems like you guys are just elevating things even more. But would that have been possible without any one of you?
I've always thought, like, to create a really believable cinematic experience, it's the sum of its parts. And so, yeah, I think you're nailing it. It takes everybody, and to understand how to build an emotional experience too takes a lot more conversation and understanding how to create those quiet moments for the big moments. And I think the beauty of, at least my experience coming on to the team and the studio and the project, has been how, like, open of a feedback culture and how collaborative everyone is, and just real, like, synergy in working together, which makes working on the project really, really fun and really amazing.
Yeah, we following up on that, we sort of say that Quill is sort of like, she's like all of our child in a way. Like the soul of Quill only happened because everybody at the time when we were working on Moss 1 is just so passionate about her as a character and bring her forward. So it didn't matter what discipline, because we were a team of 15, a really small studio, and every single one of those people had a hand in forming Quill. So she came from a diverse set of like thought and sort of goals for who she was and what she would do, and trying to make her feel real. So everybody really had a part, and continuing for Moss 2, that's absolutely continuing to be the case. We want Quill to represent who we are as a studio, the type of game we want to create, and the type of character that we're happy for players to connect with.
And that brings up a good point too. Is there something to be said for players' connections with Quill being connections to each of you, and the work that you're putting into this character, that she's that conduit between the players and you, and the story that's being written, the music that's being made, or the sound effects, the art, all of that. And almost what the purpose of this talk even is, that's got us here today, is to connect players with you directly and people with you directly to see how you're doing things. Does Quill accomplish that in a way too?
Yeah, I was going to add on that it's interesting because Quill's obviously the main character, but so are you. The player character is also a main character in the world, in the game. And it's interesting because the reader, the player character, we want to do it in a way that leaves room for players as individuals to have their own feelings about what's happening in the situation, which can be a challenge. And we're not trying to force like a bond on anyone, but we're offering players kind of a genuine connection to Quill if they want to take us up on it. And obviously we're guiding with all of the elements, like the mood and the ambiance and the music, and everything's kind of trying to guide. But the player character, we're not writing dialogue for them. And so it was important to us to just consider that throughout the process, and leave room for the individuality of the players to be characters in the space with Quill, which I think helps that connection, because people are probably feeling different things, and that's a good thing.
All right. Let's see here. So Moss was something entirely original. It was a way to push the medium of virtual reality forward in a big way. What did you feel that you could gain by doing a Moss book 2 rather than exploring new ideas via a new IP?
we had a lot more story to tell. I think that's really what it came down to. Like Moss One, you know, being such a small team, and we were, I mean, we all loved making the game. Like we're all really into it. We shipped, and the biggest complaint seemed to be that the game wasn't long enough. So we're like, yeah, we're excited to jump in and do some more and to continue telling her story. That doesn't mean that the studio isn't looking at other things too, but it was like something we were really excited to jump in.
I think from the beginning, it was always the hope that it would be a bigger story, and there were ideas for the bigger story, and the Moss One ending is begging for a continuation of the story. And so I think we were all just hoping that we would have the opportunity to continue doing that. And so it's great that we do.
To Rick's response, it's kind of a bit of a why not both situation. Thankfully, due to the success of Moss, we have the opportunity to not only extend the story of Moss, but also, you know, advance the studio and looking at other stories that we can tell too. So we're we feel very fortunate, and we're excited to have that opportunity.
And I mean, speaking of the future of the studio and kind of what you guys are planning, and just in general, a lot of you come from a background of coming from other developers, other studios, other areas within the games industry, and then you're coming into this team that's it's a really big small team, right? You've got a lot going on, but you're still that small team. You still got a lot of that collaborative effort that I would think you don't see in a lot of other kind of bigger studios in a way, because it's almost not possible. So how are you keeping that that culture and that spirit of collaboration as you grow and as you move forward into new things, you know, and not kind of growing out of what makes Polyarc?
I hope we're keeping that spirit. I feel it very often that we're keeping that spirit. It might just be that, you know, we're keeping our team size small.
Yeah.
The team for Moss 2 is still like 15 core members, even though the studio now is over 30 people strong. And that just, you know, when you separate that out into the disciplines, you only have so many people of the different disciplines, and we're just naturally going to have to work together. So one of those things could be, you know, we are going to keep that scale smaller for our projects to make sure that we can create these intimate moments. But then also, you know, a lot of the company culture, as it was mentioned before, is very strongly rooted in collaboration, in respect for the ideas that everybody is bringing to the table, and ensuring that all of their voices are heard when we're talking about what do we want to do with the game. You know, you hear a lot of, like, depending on the studio, there's going to be certain disciplines that are pushing things more. But really, when we're talking about decisions that get made for Moss creatively, we get everybody in the room and we talk about that. We build our goals together. And then, you know, we're going to then say, hey, this discipline's going to drive that. But they drove this thing that we all together as a team really wanted to push forward. And I think that collaboration is really a key part of our culture that we want to foster and ensure that we continue to build as the studio gets larger.
Sorry, I just want to add, I think it's also easier when the directors are also in mixing it up, making content themselves too. So it's harder to lose touch when everybody's hands-on, you know, as opposed to the AAA big studio thing where directors just don't have time for that kind of thing. So that's what the small studio needs.
Totally. It also makes it a bit hectic because we're constantly weaving in and out of the trenches as we're like going from planning things to, okay, what is the blueprint now going to look like in Unreal Engine, and figure that out. But it keeps us on our toes.
Is everybody else feeling the same way, that spirit of collaboration? It seems like that's a lot of what you've been talking about, that you're in those meetings with everybody from the different disciplines. You're not siloed in the audio space or the narrative space or the art space. It's all very much, you know, getting together at all points in time. And I know, Rick, when you and I talked years ago about Moss One, a lot of that was about, you know, somebody who wasn't an animator even coming in and having these ideas like, hey, what if you did this? What if you, do you still have a lot of that going into book 2, and a lot of people coming up with ideas that aren't necessarily their own disciplines? Are there any fun stories there?
I got one. On Moss 1, I had to try and teach myself sign language, and I did a horrible job at it because I was just using YouTube videos. I mean, it's not like I was practicing it on a daily basis, but we ended up hiring a lead engineer named Mike Felice, who is fluent in sign language. So on top of his role as being our engineering director, he is the one also doing all the reference and all of the explanation for what the ASL performances are going to be for Quill in this game. And oh my God, it's amazing.
Props to Mike Felice. He's awesome.
Anybody else have any interesting anecdotes of cross-discipline things where, maybe it's something you've come up with even for somebody else to do, some ideas there?
I mean, I think my entire existence is cross-discipline because I have a 15-year human resources background, and I
should mention Shauna is also our HR director.
I also do HR, and so just having the opportunity to come in and I've been around game development for so long, but Polyarc just provided this opportunity to actually also be involved in development, which is a lot of learning and a lot of mentorship from everybody. And so it's just so collaborative. And I feel like I sometimes even have to keep training and pushing myself to give feedback because I'm like, oh, these people are experts in their field. They why would they want my feedback? But they do. And it's really, really special.
That's good. All right, we're going to jump to a few questions that have been posted in here by some of the people who are watching. So Igor Hardy says, what do you think is the next big milestone to achieve for immersive narrative VR games? I think that's probably a question for Josh, maybe, as the designer, but anybody.
I don't know. I think anybody could. I'd be curious to hear other people's takes on this. One of the things that we are excited about potentially being a thing in the future is, not just interacting with the character. And Rick, we were sort of trying some things out in this direction a little bit before, not just interacting with the character, but potentially speaking to a character, I think is one of the next big immersive milestones. And it's one of those things that's oh, you speak to them. I talk to my virtual assistant all the time, but it is so complicated to dissect intent from what somebody is saying to what that character is going to understand. And then also the realities of game development where we want to have this game reach everyone in the world, then doing that again for every single language and potentially dialect that exists in the world. And that's a big thing. And I'm really excited about getting to the point where that is something that studios, especially studios our size, can have some method of bringing in and integrating into our games, because people talk to Quill naturally already, and then imagine talking to Quill and actually having her respond in a way that truly respects exactly what you just said, and then the bond and the relationship that can grow from there. That's just insane to me, just thinking of that, and I know we're going to get there at some point. It's just a matter of when, and when will that tech be there. Maybe Rick, did you have something you wanted to add to it?
Well, I mean, you said it great. We had lots of great discussions about adding vocal recognition to Quill. And it's super hard, and a tiny team like us really doesn't have the bandwidth to do something like that. But that is when somebody does that right, that'll be huge. Being able to just speak to your virtual character and have them not just answer you like Siri would, where if you ask her a question, she gives you a flatline answer, but to get answers that aren't expected, or to get responses that are shocking or interesting or make you think about those responses hours after the conversation. That's the future. And whatever team gets there first it's going to be game changer.
One thing I'll add to that too, just talking to one of our engineers, one of the things that he was mentioning, one of our engineers, Brendan, is the progression of eye tracking in VR. And so what that means is right now we can kind of like detect where you're looking in general, just based on where your head's tilted. But with eye tracking, one thing you could do with Quill would be to say, make eye contact, which is on a whole new level compared to, it's one of the most powerful things you can do to the person, I think. And so that it'll be pretty wild.
All right. Natalie is asking, are VR games significantly harder to make feel good on the player end across every part of development, audio control, visuals, every piece of that? Is it harder to make it feel good? And it goes back to kind of that comfort mantra, I guess, that we started talking about.
I'll jump in on that one a little bit on the audio side. It's there are certain frequencies that I find way more uncomfortable in a headset. And so really trying to keep an eye on how much we're fatiguing players and paying attention to like frequency treatments, or how jump scare is something, or how hard is something impacting as a transient, like just all those things in terms of not fatiguing or startling players in a way that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, building off that, one of the things that's harder on the design side is in terms of difficulty or challenge of certain things that are in the game. And I think we've mentioned this in some previous talks, but like players who are trying to get through a tough puzzle, it's just so much more strenuous when you've got this big giant headset on and you're trying to solve something, you're feeling this pressure and your head literally starts sweating in the headset. And we have to actually try to keep in mind, like, oh, is this maybe too hard, or are players going to have too much of a struggle with this? And how are we going to, but that actually then kind of led in some part to us trying to have Quill hint more, because we wanted something to be difficult, but also if the player was spending too much time, we're a little worried that they are going to get that head sweat, and we want to actually help them out. There's, making a game in VR is kind of, you still have to make the base game, and then it's the VR stuff on top of it. In addition, a lot of those additional considerations on the design side, for sure, it's harder comparing it to my previous work, working on 2D platforms. But also, it could just be the stuff is new, and we're still figuring out the right way to approach it, and we're still kind of in the trailblazing phase. VR is really picking up. We can see with like the new headset, there's a lot of adoption, but it's still new relative to everything. So even us as developers, we're fortunate the game has done so well, but we're still learning so much as we go. And ideally, we retain all of those learnings and we can continue to improve how we're working on these games. But it seems like every time we want to add a new feature to the game, there's that stumbling block of like, oh, I wasn't thinking of it this way. I totally forgot about this, like how it would work in VR. So a lot of it is, okay, if we're trying something new, we have to really try to ensure at the very least we do some heavy prototyping in virtual reality to get a bunch of different people to try it out, because people have different heights, they have different arm lengths, they have different levels of comfort, and there's just so many different things where before it was like they're going to hold a controller, and it's all about that single level of input. So there's a lot more things to consider when you're trying to make a really comfortable, enjoyable, immersive experience for players.
And an emotional one too.
Yes,
so
emotional.
If you get the players too emotional, they start crying in their headset. All of a sudden, you got electric face. We don't want to electrify people's faces.
Yeah, try to keep the fog out of there.
And as a follow-up to that, to the comfort aspect, is there anybody at the studio that gets motion sick while playing VR games?
I'm looking at Rick.
So you're the perfect test subjects to make sure that what you're doing with Quill is comfortable for a good majority of people that would play the game then.
Ideally, and everybody's playing it. So we try to ensure that we do get as diverse a set of players as possible. Even if they need to have, what is it that you'll need to take, Rick? Like ginger chews for motion sickness. I think there's a few other things that you tried.
Ginger tea, ginger chews, and I try and limit to 10 minutes max. But yeah.
will say that I'm someone who gets incredibly car sick, boat sick, motion sick. And for anyone who hasn't actually been in VR, like when we're like streaming play tests and I'm watching somebody else play on the screen, I have to like often look away because it's just, I get motion sickness from that. But when I'm actually in the headset playing, I don't really experience any, I don't experience any motion sickness in Moss. I think after a couple hours, like you need a break or I need a break, but I was amazed that I don't experience motion sickness playing Moss. Just watching it when someone else is.
So just as we're kind of closing out here, getting to the end of things. One last thing is, how was it working during COVID? And was there a lot of issues there? A lot of did that collaboration? Did it help make it stronger? Did it weaken that? How was that with a studio that's so collaborative?
Some shaking, nodding.
Who
wants to take this one?
All right. I'll start. I think it was a shock at first because most of the team went into the office every day. There was a select handful of us that were already doing like a partial work from home thing. Like I was doing 1 to 2 days a week at home, and a few other people were as well. So we had a little bit of infrastructure in place to support that, but not a lot. So I think it initially it set us back some right off the bat. But just like every studio out there, we learned how to deal with it, and we came up with good mitigation practices. We are getting a lot better at like doing chat rooms in Discord, where they could just jump in, like water cooler rooms and stuff like that, to try and emulate the office experience. We're getting a lot less resistant to just spontaneous Zoom, like, hey, I want to talk about something, and then just send somebody a Zoom link. And it's getting a lot closer to that more collaborative work experience. But I think there are some benefits to it as well. Like I'm a dad and I love my kids, and being around them more is not a bad thing. And not having a commute is not a bad thing. And just because it was a long commute for me, so being able to have another 2.5 hours out of every day to spend with my kids is like, wow, that's fantastic. I'm all for that. So like I think everybody's different. Like some people are more extroverted and they struggled more. Other people like me are more introverted, where I was like, oh, I'm okay with this. So like it's just dealing with that fallout. It's been hard.
To talk a little bit on the audio side too, like we were to like do good recordings and clean recording spaces. Like we were already doing work from home days, much like Rick was talking to. So we were already pretty well set up to do it. I think I agree with all the pros and cons of it. I am an extremely extroverted person, surprisingly, but disguised as an introvert. And I really did miss being in the office with the team, but I feel like I've worked half my career offsite, and I actually think the studio adopted really well to it, and it felt pretty seamless to me in terms of keeping our collaboration and play tests and jumping on Discord or whatever that looks like. I felt like the team stayed really engaged and collaborative.
Yeah, there's a while there at the beginning when we were still making the initial transition that I didn't actually have a VR set up at my home office, and which I thought was fine because we were play testing and I was watching streams and I was seeing videos. And then I finally got the VR set up at my home and went into VR, and my jaw kind of dropped because it was just such a reminder how different it is being in the game with Quill. And feeling like I felt so much like it was kind of a moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, Quill. And I like talked to her and like I felt so much more connected. And I was like, yeah, this is what it's all about. And so there was definitely a transition there where I just needed to get my home technology in the right spot.
Yeah, that's where our tech department, our IT department, our CEO Tam, really he really shined during all of this. He's the guy who was dropping off PCs at everyone's houses so people could work from home. ensuring that all of our network infrastructure was set up so that, it was almost like without a hitch. They did such a great job, and it feels good. The only thing I'm really missing is we just got into a new building right before that pandemic hit, and we were in there for about 2 months, 2 or 3 months, and now we've been out of our building for over a year and a half now. So
all right, well, we're out of time here, so thank you for everybody coming together, and we'll talk again soon.
Cool. Chandler, thank you so much.
Thank you.
There we go.